like there's no way to be too nerdy considering what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean,
this isn't a thing that you can be like...
Yeah, massively geeky enterprise this whole video is, but you know, it's fun.
Oh, I mean, yeah. My favourite time of the year.
It is. It's like Christmas. Okay. Never know how to begin. So it is that time again. Try that again. So it is that time again. I'm here with Anna again. Hooray! For what has become basically an annual tradition. Before the Women's Prize for Fiction, before the Longlist is announced, we get together and give our predictions of our guesses or our wish list. Our wish list. I think that's what we're going to call it, is our wish list of what we hope will be on the long list this year. And this is just sort of as an indication for anyone who might not be on publication dates of what might be on the list. And especially what we hope will be on the list. Yeah. It's just always fun to guess, isn't it? And so like, do you ever get that thing where like, I made a video about this like last summer, sort of rallying against like when the big like football championship was on. I was like, why does everyone so get into football? Yeah. Well, I don't even know what it's called, but yeah, you know, the big football match thing that everyone gets excited about. And I'm like, why do I have to listen to this all the time? But then when like a book prize like this comes up and I'm like, I sort of geekily like think about it all the time and like talking about it all the time with people, and sort of like, it's actually the same thing with like RuPaul's Drag Race, where like before RuPaul's Drag Race, I didn't understand why everyone got so excited about sports competitions, but like now I'm like, I could talk about it endlessly and all the different contestants and like, who's gonna go off.
I got into the World Cup for the first time ever, just because I got like swept away with England.
Right, yeah, because they got very far into it.
I felt like it was a nice team this year, and like I like Gareth Southgate.
Yeah,
I felt like it wasn't riddled with the sort of like weird masculinity stuff that, I mean, probably is still, but like less overtly.
Sure, you know much more than I do.
But I'm much more interested in the Women's Prize.
Yes.
And Drag Race.
Yes, which we won't start talking about that because then it could just go on and on about that. So
although we need to talk about.
There's a lot to say about it, but we'll talk about that afterwards. So the Women's Prize, the long list will be announced on March 4th this year, and the long list will probably be 16 books. Might be less, but like they always threaten to make it less, but then they're like, there's so many good books we have to put.
Oh yeah, they did say, didn't they? One year they were going to do 12, and then when it came out, they're like,
no, we couldn't choose. It had to be 16. So we've each picked 16 books, and as the tradition goes, we've listed our books in alphabetical order. We'll alternate talking about one of the books, see if we have any matches.
So we don't know what each other's picked.
No, so it's a fun sort of game, very geeky game, but like fun sort of game to see.
It's like fantasy football for book nerds.
But we'd love to know what you think too afterwards. If you want to put in the comments below if you agree with any of our choices, if you have any books that you're rooting for and really hoping to see on the list. And I mean, it is so difficult to choose because it's any novel by a woman written in English, published in the last year. And the time frame we're looking at is from the beginning of April 2018 till the end of March this year. Mm-hmm. So that's the sort of publication dates it needs to fall under. And we think we've got them right, but we might get something wrong, so don't crucify us if we got something out of date. Yeah.
Also, I would say I have erred towards more wish list than predictions this year. Last year I went more prediction-y.
Which served you very well because
we did well.
Out of our prediction list, we got the entire shortlist. What it turned out to be the shortlist, and we both like had these like long alternate lists of like stuff we wanted to see on the list too, or think might be on the list. So it's difficult to know, but we'll just launch in and see how we do. I think you should start. We're going in alphabetical order. Okay.
So my first pick is Transcription by Kate Atkinson.
Oh, okay.
Which I haven't read, which I'm like...
I've not read it either.
I love Kate Atkinson so much, and it's one of those ones that I don't really know, like, just there's so many books. And I think I think I felt like I was saving it, and then I never had, like... I was like, I'll save it for when I got time to enjoy it. I don't ever have time to just sit and, like, just enjoy a book like that.
And it's a fairly long novel, too, so it's not one you can just sort of breeze through in a day.
But Life After Life and A God in Ruins are two of my favourite books, and this is apparently... brilliant.
And I have to admit, I've only read A God in Ruins, but I loved it. I thought it was brilliant, and I've wanted to read more by her, but I just haven't got to it. So.
I love it, and I really need to to read it, so this would be good reason. So
yeah,
that's my first pick. Which
so
you haven't picked.
No, I haven't.
You've
I don't have any
only chosen books you've read.
I've only picked books that I've read.
Where mine are mainly books I've read, with a few books that I would really like to read and think have a good shot.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Okay.
So my first choice is Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker.
This was on my, like, nearly list.
On the brink.
I think there's another book that will be on there that's kind of
similar.
Okay. But I think they might, I don't know how much they're thinking about the collection of books as a whole.
Yeah.
And I think that if they are, they might go for the other one over this.
It's tricky because, there have been a whole group of books recently sort of reimagining Greek mythology from a woman's point of view. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Silence of the Girls. Yeah. This is a reimagining of Greek mythology from a woman's point of view, a queen of a kingdom that is conquered by Achilles, and she becomes sort of a trophy, sort of wife for Achilles. And it's about
trophy wife.
Yeah, basically, yeah, and obviously, as a lot of people know, Achilles had a very close relationship with a man, and so it's about the whole complexity of that dynamic. So she portrays the whole that whole relationship and the politics struggle between Achilles and Agamemnon. I always have a lot of trouble saying that name, Agamemnon. About the lives of women that are part of these nations that were conquered by these bigger empires and then got absorbed into their life and their whole different relationships. And I feel like it's a book that, like, a number of people have said, like this book should have got more attention, more awards attention, and it hasn't yet. So maybe this is the chance for Pat Barker.
I wouldn't be surprised. My next one is America Is Not the Heart by Elaine
Castillo, which I also put.
Yay!
Didn't match.
You've got more in front.
Mm-hmm.
I loved this book so much. I way more than I was expecting to. I read it because I interviewed her at Cheltenham Festival, and so I read it in preparation for that, and I just completely fell for it. I thought it was so. It's a book about the Filipino community in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah.
And specifically focused on a young woman who is illegal there, and about her sort of life there and her past. And her
recalling, her past in the Philippines, and during a very fraught sort of wartime period in the Philippines.
And I just thought it's so beautifully written. It has that balance between grappling with really big subjects whilst also having a real lightness and wit and warmth to it. And it's quite long, and there are sections where more sort of dramatic things are happening, but a lot of it is about the sort of minutiae of life and interpersonal relationships. And I just was so invested in her and her family, and I was really moved by it. And also she writes about food incredibly well. It's got a queer relationship.
Yeah, it's a bisexual sort of character at the centre of it. Yeah.
That's really just beautifully written and very warm and sensitive, and I was so emotionally invested in this. And for a book that's very long and has a lot of just descriptions of just life, which is normally really not my sort of thing, I completely fell for it.
And the opening section of it I thought was gorgeously written. It's sort of written in the second person, talking about this character who grows up in the Philippines and her moving to become a nurse in the States, and just it's just
really
so powerful.
Frame the story
it
as well,
is, yeah.
She isn't the main character as such, but she is a part of that person's life, and it was a really clever way to frame the story by having it second person. As soon as it's one of those books that as soon as I read that I was like, ugh, like she can write. This is gonna be great. And a match.
Yeah, and our first match. White Houses by Amy Bloom.
Okay.
Do you know this book?
Yes. So this was another one that was on my, honestly, I've got a list of 5 books that I nearly put in it. Both Silence of the Girls and White Houses are on that.
And personally, I just love the story. And I think mainly because it's like a beautiful, the way she portrays this romance. So it's about the life of Eleanor Roosevelt, and it's told from this perspective of a female journalist who Eleanor Roosevelt almost certainly had a long-term romantic and sexual relationship with that. Like, I don't think there's any actual evidence that they had a sexual relationship, but there are a lot of letters that are very romantic in their tone, and like much more than like just a friendship. And so yeah, it's I sort of feel like it was always like an open secret at the time that they were in a relationship. But Eleanor Roosevelt was the first lady of the United States at the time, and so yeah, it's about all the complexities, as you can imagine, of what would come from having a relationship with the first lady of the United States, having an affair with her while she is in that political position. So and just it's so the love scenes in it are just so tender and beautifully written, and like just this real like honest portrayal of bodies and like in our aging bodies, and how, and you know, when you love somebody you can look past the, you know, so-called flaws of somebody, and I just thought it was that was so gorgeously done that I just like, you know, just like filled my heart with warmth.
My next one is a book that I'm not sure I really think is going to be there, but I loved it so much, and it's another book that I think deserves so much more attention, and it's The Illumination of Ursula Fly by Anna Marie Crowhurst. Yay!
My next choice too. Yay.
And I just loved it. I thought it was so it's a book about a young woman. Well, it starts when she's a child, and it's about her growing up in
the 1600s.
Yeah, and she
1600s.
is very precocious, almost like proto-feminist essentially.
Yeah.
And she likes writing plays, and she wants to write plays, and she lives in this kind of rural, well-off kind of bubble, and then
sort
she
of privileged
is
family. She
married off to an older man who's awful, and it progresses from that. And it's also told, like, some of the sections are told as play scripts, and it's just it's so funny and witty and clever and warm. It's kind of like The Voice. This is a weird comparison, but it's almost like a bawdy Anne of Green Gables, which I realise like Anne of Green Gables is like the opposite of that, but she's got that like precocious imagination and optimism.
Yeah.
That really, it's like, imagine like a 17th century bawdy Anne Shirley. And if that appeals,
then
you should read this. It's so wonderful, and I just really think that
it was such a joy to read. I just
things in common, I think, with The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock.
Yeah.
Like historical,
and does like deal with some dark subject matter and a lot of feminist subject matter, but it's written in a way that you just get into the story and enjoy it so much, and like you said, like it's so creatively structured as well with the plays, and then there are other sections
like
where there are like letters
and just letters, and I really love that in books.
And I know like there had been some other booktubers out there who've read it and loved it. Like I know Melanie out there, like she was a big cheerleader for this as well. But yeah, it like to see it get like a wider readership and people talking about it. Because I think a lot of people will just love reading this.
Just in that sweet spot of being incredibly well executed, but also has that kind of commercial potential. Like I would recommend it to so many different people.
Okay, so I don't know if you have this. My next one is Washington Black by Edugyan. Oh, wow! This might be the most matches ever. Gosh, but it is a very logical choice. It was on the shortlist for the Booker Prize last year, and this was one of my favorite novels that I read last year. I just loved it. Have you read it?
No, I must admit I didn't read it because I didn't love Half-Blood Blues.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I've heard...
Which was on the Booker shortlist, 6 years ago, something like that, and I read it then, and I didn't get on with it. I didn't hate it, but it just wasn't didn't capture my imagination. But I included it because A, it was on, had Booker attention, and B, because you liked it. And we do tend to overlap in taste,
I think you would. I mean, I haven't read any of her other books, so this was my first exposure to her writing. I just loved it so much. So and it's another book that deals with very dark subject matter. It starts with a boy on a slave plantation in the 1600s, but he has a very scientific mind and a real great artistic skill. And he meets a man, the brother of the plantation owner, who recognizes that in him, who just needs an assistant at first, but then sees that he has this talent and helps him foster it and develop it. And they go on, it sort of becomes like an adventure novel as they sort of travel to many different locations in the world. But it's about his process of discovery and him growing as a man and nurturing his talents. Across another match, third match so far.
My next one is Old Baggage by Lisa Evans.
And I haven't put this on my list, but I did just read it recently and loved it. And so, yeah.
I feel like...
It was more strategic. I just sort of thought like, will it actually get in?
I do think that the Women's Prize, often, particularly with its long list, there's spaces for books like this.
Yeah.
And it's so well done. And it's about a woman who was or is a suffragette, but after the kind of they've won the initial vote, but it's still limited. But a lot of the kind of energy went out of the campaign, and it's about kind of when you've sort of dedicated your whole life to a cause and you've sort of won, what do you do? And she channels her energy into trying to kind of rally young girls, and it's just this witty. I love Lisa Evans' writing.
She's a very complicated character too. She's like not she's not the nicest or easiest person to get along with. She's a very good person, but like a lot of activists, a lot of people who are very passionate about a cause, they can be very like single-minded and not all that sympathetic to other people's feelings and so tackling.
She's such a great character.
She is, so much fun to read about and really interesting and fascinating, complex.
And the book is really moving as well, and it's really smart on its kind of exploration of these kind of activism, what you do with that, and the suffragette movement, and it's got some beautifully explored relationships, and it's feminist and political,
because it gets into one of the women who used to be a suffragette with her has gone on to become a fascist basically, and is helping lead a growing fascist movement in Britain during that time, which was a historical fact. So my next choice is Swan by Kelleigh, Greenberg-Jephcott. Yay! For another match. Wow. And we both chose pink. Isn't that nice?
I haven't read this one, but honestly, I don't know why it has so many things that I love, and I'm pretty confident I will love it.
I'm confident
and I think Kelleigh is great, and
she's such a character, the author too. She's so wonderful. She's
100% gonna watch this.
Yeah, she will too. So hi Kelleigh. That's not why I'm including this book. But because I think this. And I've sort of talked about this before, where I think it's sort of tricky with this novel, and that it was published that it's about such a sensationalist subject. It's about the lives of a number of different high society women who are friends with Truman Capote, and Truman Capote, towards the end of his life, fictionalized them in a novel which he started, didn't complete, but wrote sections of the novel, and they were published. They're basically very thinly veiled portrait of these women's lives, the intimate details and their secrets. And so quite justifiably, a lot of these female friends of his felt like this was a huge betrayal, and that he put their lives into fiction, and it's sort of tricky. He sort of thought he was immortalizing them and sort of doing them a favor by putting them in a literary book, but obviously personally they felt very differently. And so Kelleigh explores this whole complex relationship and event by looking at the different women's lives, and tells it in such an interesting narrative style, where it's a sort of collective we, where she discusses their lives, but then very much focuses on the lives of the individual women, who are all fascinating in their own right, in that they were, some of them were heiresses and were born into this position. Some of them worked their way up into this position in society, but were involved in fashion lines and steering the culture at that time. So we're all fascinating, but then also this relationship with Truman Capote, and she looks at the life of Truman Capote. So there's all this sort of big high society, sort of, you could say, sort of gossipy stuff happening, which is so much fun to read about. But then also like the way it's constructed and the
I love that. I didn't realise it was written
like,
in a collective voice, and I really, when that's, it's hard to do well, but when it's done well, I really enjoy that.
Yeah. And so yeah, it was such a like challenging thing that she did, and I think she did it so well. And so like yeah, like I think that is a huge accomplishment, which is like easy to overlook because of the sort of gossipy nature of the story.
I don't think this was that, but you never know. My next pick is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which is
and I've not read it yet, so yeah,
just eligible. Comes out in March. I toyed with putting this on in terms of whether I thought this was one that I just loved, and I hope it is there. This is the story of a fictionalized band that certainly has a Fleetwood Mac feel in the 60s and I'm gonna get the date wrong. I think the 60s. Yeah, like touring America. And it's the story of how they became. So there's the band, the Six, and this singer Daisy Jones, who's this kind of enigma. Their rise to fame, and they split up very abruptly. And the book is presented as if it's real, and another thing that I really enjoy. So it's basically presented as in like, this is this band that split up really dramatically, and no one knows why it happened. This is a story of how it happened, and it's told in the voices of lots of different characters. Another thing I really enjoy. And it's another one of those ones that is so well written, but also so much fun, and it just really conjures this time of kind of these like rock and roll bands, and Daisy Jones is just like, she's super troubled, but she's like really cool. And it's just, you care so much about the stories, and it's also just really interesting on art and how we create things and where that comes from. And I read it really quickly, and my partner read it, and he said it's one of the best. It's gone into his favourites of all. Like, he'd have it in his favourites. But I think that if you are into that kind of era of music or music generally, you would really love it. Yeah, like when we love reading books about writers and books. It's great.
Okay, next, When All Is Said by Anne Griffin. Have you heard of this?
Oh, yeah. I read an early version of this. This is what I always do with this. I forget about books that I read when I was scouting. So I read an unedited version ages ago and completely passed me by that it was eligible.
Well, I've read the finished published book, so I can say with authority that. So it's about an old man, very late in his life. He's in his 80s, and he's reflecting on his life. He's just making a transition where he's just sold his home and sort of moving on, and he goes to a bar and he has a drink, dedicating those drinks to different people, significant people in his life who made a big difference. And so over the course of that, tells the story of his whole life, basically from growing up in a very rural, working class Irish family to becoming a big sort of property owner and developer and being very successful, and his relationship with this very landed estate that he used to work on as a boy, and he was abused by the owners, and so there's this it's the story of his life, but also there's this mystery at the center of it. Yeah, it's just so wonderfully told, and has this wonderful, it's like such a stereotype, but this sort of Irish sense of humor, which is very clever and witty and funny, and it's a type of writing that I just love so much.
My next one is, I felt like there has been lots of books I've read. My next one is another one I haven't read. It's An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. I'm pretty sure this is eligible. This one is one that I put on because, Max, he's a booktuber and Instabookstagrammer.
Oh yeah.
What is it? Well done, Max?
Yeah, Well Done Books.
I'm sorry, I'm butchering his. But he
used to be a great booktuber and just stopped making videos, unfortunately.
But he's really active on Instagram talking about books.
He's great on Instagram.
I really like his taste. I feel like we overlap a lot, and he loved this, and that was what brought my attention to it. And then it just sounds I just think it sounds really interesting. One that I just really want to read.
Mm-hmm. Me too. I haven't read it yet either,
it's
so
very sort of,
I'm really
it's very
anticipating.
critically acclaimed in the US, hasn't it? So,
It has, yeah. Very well.
I'm just really looking forward to reading
Although
it.
I have seen there's been a lot of mixed reactions to it.
Oh, really?
Not everybody loves it. So
Okay,
yeah,
that's
just to say. But
my circles have been very positive about it.
Okay, my next is Barbara Kingsolver, Unsheltered.
I didn't go with this one in the end.
Oh.
I haven't read it.
And it's gonna sound like such a backhanded compliment, but I think it deserves to be longlisted, but I don't think it deserves to win. That sounds sort of mean, but I love Barbara Kingsolver's writing so much, and like a lot of people do, and I loved reading this. It's such a great novel, and the way she writes about characters in like such a distinct way, and it's very like relevant, like politically, how she's writing about it, and it has so many good things going for it. But I felt like in the later part of the book, like again, just sort of like I felt like the way she structured the story, it went a bit off and it wasn't entirely successful, but it's such a great novel, like nevertheless.
Okay. I have like a really funny relationship with Barbara funny, that's over again. Basically, I read The Lacuna when I was like 22 and didn't particularly enjoy it. But it's also one of those books that I think I probably would have really enjoyed if I read now.
Right,
it was when I was just starting to I've obviously always read, but it was when I was just starting to get into like literary fiction.
I sort of hope it gets listed now just so that you have to read it, and then we can find out what your reaction to it is, because that'd be so fascinating
to know.
And it's so well done. It's so fascinating. Such a and the way she constructs the story, it's like so fascinating how she does it, because it's basically about the current time in 2016 of a family living in a house that's literally crumbling down around them, and it's there's all sorts of issues in this family, but it's beautifully written and really brilliant, and so it's this contemporary storyline paired with a story from the late 1800s of a family living in the same house, the same location. The house is also sort of literally crumbling around them, and it follows the husband of this family, mainly his perspective and his political struggles at the time, because it's he's a science teacher, and it's just in the stage when Darwin's theories are becoming popularized and well known, and the sort of lots of debates in the society at the time where the head of the school is religious and wants to sort of fall back on these creationist ideas against Darwin's theories. And so it's sort of about this the like parallels in political situations from contemporary times and past times. She's a writer where she does a huge amount of research, and I think she sort of suffers that way, and some writers do, from having so much research that I could almost see that she wanted to fit in these sort of interesting things she found, and so she was sort of forcing the plot at some points. But that's just my take on it. But yeah.
My next one is The Water Cure.
Next one.
I love this book. It is the story of three sisters. You don't really ever know a lot of specifics about where they are, but they're in a kind of, secluded place with initially their father and mother, and then their father leaves.
Disappears.
And they are brought up being told that men are physically dangerous to them, and they kind of go through these really intense purification rituals, and then basically it's what happens when three men wash up on the shore. This is one of my favourite books of last year. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was beautifully written. It's very lyrical and poetic, but not in a wanky, pretentious way. And I loved the way it explored ideas of gender, and I don't want to spoil it, but the ending is one of my favourite endings in a book I've read in ages. I just love the way that she brought it all together. Yeah,
it's great.
Just one of my favourites.
And I have to say too that it deals with gender in a much more complex way than I think you'll probably expect. I feel sort of bad that this novel has been sort of labelled sort of feminist dystopian novel, and people get an idea in their heads of like
oh
well, I know how that's going to play out, but I think it really does explore like gender roles and the complexity of gender in a really interesting and unique way.
Great.
Good. Another. So this one I know you don't have because actually this was before. It's Where Reasons End by Yiyun Li.
Is this fiction?
It is.
Oh.
Well, it's sort of labelled fiction, very heavily based on
so you see,
sort of authors
I
on
feel
life, but it
silly
is
about
fiction.
this because I read her book
Memoir.
of essays, memoir. My dear friend from I Write to You
from my life, I Write to You in Your Life.
Really, and I adored it. It was one of my favourite books.
It's so good, but it's like again very like devastating subject matter about a mother having a conversation, imagined conversation with her teenage son who committed suicide, and so but it's quite unexpected in how it doesn't necessarily deal with like the details surrounding his suicide or like why he even committed suicide necessarily. It's more just them talking about life and conversing, like as you can tell from reading her essays, the memoirist essays, like she writes about language in such a fascinating way and how language relates to our lives, how we articulate our experiences, about the nature of being, and so it all sounds very like highfalutin sort of literary, but it's like done in such an emotional, touching way that but which also there are some actually sort of funny things in it. It's where it almost feels like she's poking fun at herself, where the mother writing it is a writer, so it's very close to her experience, but where the son is sort of taking the piss out of her sometimes, and really like don't take yourself so seriously, and so it's this sort of magical thinking, like imagined conversation, which is just so beautifully done, and she's just such an incredible writer. And
my next one, I'm pretty sure you'll have, is Circe, which I don't know that it ever tipped over. It wasn't like one of those ones where I was just academically impressed by it. I absolutely was moved and emotionally engaged, but I'm not sure I ever tipped over into just being, when you read those books that you love kind of unreservedly, and I don't think it ever quite tipped over into that, like I was wholly into it. But I thought this was brilliant, and I love myth retellings, and I thought it was so clever and wonderful, and she creates this brilliant character from Circe, and I really enjoyed seeing all the myths I was more familiar with, because I didn't know a lot about her story, her myth, and I enjoyed seeing the kind of
she's such an interesting case because she sort of dips in and out of a number of
the like iconic
mythology
ones.
Which more than I realized, but was sort of actually that was an issue while I was reading it. I had slight issue with that. I thought it started almost to feel like she was trying to cram in too many myths, where it sort of felt like this sort of like greatest hit sort of thing, like I had to get them all in there, where it's like you could have just focused on.
And maybe that's why I had that reaction to it, because I do feel like the first half of the book I was like, this is going to be one of my favourite books, and then I sort of, and I think that you have hit the nail on the head, and I think that's perhaps why I ended up kind of taking a slight emotional step back from it as the book progressed.
But nevertheless, I loved the reading experience. I thought, it's
she's an incredible
so
writer.
great. Yeah, she is like really beautiful, exquisite writing, and like the way she writes about emotions and love and passion is so wonderful. Yes. My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh.
I've forgotten to write this one down. I haven't read it.
So there are very dark things in it, but it's not. I mean, so it's definitely not as dark as Eileen. Yeah, it is weird.
But I love weird, and I feel like if something's weird and abstract, it kind of can take the. I find like real life dark stuff upsetting to read.
It's so the story is about a woman who, sort of in her young adulthood, she doesn't have anything particularly to do, and she's in a well-off position. She can sustain herself, so she decides for a year to her goal is to sleep as much as possible. And so obviously, like, this is a big aspect, like, who wouldn't love to do that? Like, and so she just sits in and tries to sleep as much as possible. And when she's not sleeping, she's watching Whoopi Goldberg movies because she is obsessed with Whoopi Goldberg. And I don't know if you saw recently, Otesha Moshfegh interviewed Whoopi Goldberg, went to her home and interviewed Whoopi Goldberg because her character does this in the story. So yeah, it's such a fun interview to read if you go online and search that. But yeah, so it's this sort of funny premise, but then the way she goes and writes about it, she has this friend who is quite superficial, and so it's about the dynamic of their friendship, but she's somebody who has like hidden depths as like the story goes on, and the way she portrays that relationship is really complex and interesting. And also, like, towards the end of the book, I feel like it takes on this much more political message because it's set in the year 2000, before 9/11 happened, and so it's like a way of looking at history of sort of sort of this almost like wishful thinking, going back to a time where before a lot of the events of the 21st century have unfolded. I mean, maybe I have a much more like dark, twisted sense of humor, but I found it so much fun to read at the same time, even though there's all these sort of nihilistic things happening, and the way she writes about the body is in this almost like self-disgusted way is like, I think will be challenging for some people to read, but at the same time, it just, there's this like perverse fun to it.
I think it's gonna be one I love or I hate. Right, my actual next one is A Place for Us by Fatima Farheen Mirza, which I haven't read.
I've not read either.
But it's supposed to be great, and Sarah Shafi loved it, and she's got great taste.
She does.
And I feel like
Jane Campbell loves it too.
Oh, great. Well, that's another bit. Like, I feel like there's enough people that like it that I trust. It's kind of like An American Marriage. I don't know a huge amount of it. It sounds really interesting, and people I trust have said it's great, and it feels like a kind of women's prize-esque territory.
Yeah.
So.
Although it's another book that I've heard mixed things about it. Like, not everybody has loved it. So now I think this will be eligible. It's quite short, so it's Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't sure. I was Googling trying to work out what the word count was.
because we found this before with the Women's Prize. There is a word
count. It has
count.
to be a full-length novel, which they give there is a number for that, because it meant that that dystopian one, the Megan Hunter, the end we start from, was ineligible last year. Yeah,
not sure what the word count is, but yeah, Sarah Moss has talked about a lot on BookTube, much beloved author, and I think this novel is so incredible. It's the way she does it. Yeah, it's sort of a family goes on this sort of archaeological experiment where it's like this like sort of living experiment where they pretend to be people from the Bronze Age. Yeah, very long time ago. Basically, living in the woods. They wear like burlap sacks and forage for food. Why
would you want to do that?
I know, it's my nightmare. That was my childhood. I had to go through Boy Scouts and stuff, and like was forced to do crap like that all the time. I hated it.
Oh my goodness, I don't get it. It's like, also, tangent. It's like when celebrities do, I'm a celebrity, get me out there. Honestly, if you were famous and you could do like that level of famous and you had that level of reality TV, why you would choose that is absolutely beyond me when you could just strictly come dancing.
But if your career isn't... Oh, okay, well... No.
If you were famous... which reality TV show would you do?
Gosh.
I thought about this. I would do Strictly Come Dancing if I was famous. Great British Bake Off if I was me.
Oh yeah, it would be Bake Off, obviously. Yeah, I would do Bake Off. Love Island.
I mean, can you imagine if like people like us were on Love Island? We should do that. Would be hilarious. Like,
I would just always be like, I've never watched Love Island, so I have no idea what it's like. But I would just be like, really whatever all your drama is, I'm just gonna be over here reading.
I got sucked in. I was one of those people that was like, I'm above Love Island, and I watched it last year. And I was like, no one is above Love Island. What? I was such a dick to say that. I never said. I'm hamming that up. I never thought I was above it, but I really got sucked into it, and I also find
I'm sure I would too.
It's just like this. It's like old school Big Brother,
right?
Because it's just like watching people. Like it's just that like. I mean, one could say, for some of the same reason we read books, it's fascinating watching
sort of
human
voyeuristically,
interaction.
yeah. Sort of. But back to Sarah Moss and Ghost Wall.
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
We've been talking for an hour and 20 minutes, and I'm like, hang on,
Let's talk about Love Island.
Okay, carry on. Sarah Moss.
But yeah, I think it's incredibly beautiful, accomplished novel, and and another novel that comments really interestingly on our political situation now, and the girl at the center of it. I think people go into it expecting it to be more of sort of surreal, twisted story where people from the past, it's got these sort of bog people who live in this area, and they're trying to simulate some of the ceremonies of these bog people who lived in this area from prehistoric times, but it's really just about almost exclusively about the present time of what's happening in this family and this girl who's in a very perilous situation in this family with a father who has very conservative ideas and values.
This one that I'm definitely going to read, it's Gingerbread by Helen Ori.
Yes, I can't wait to read that too.
Me too. I love her, and I can't wait to read this. So I've got fairy tale illusions as well. I love fairy tale stuff, and I love her writing.
Her writing's amazing. Now you were going to laugh at me for
It's Joyce Carol Oates.
I live and hope that one day the Women's Prize will recognize Joyce Carol Oates, because like she publishes a novel every year, and she writes so much about.
That's not a reason to put her on the show.
No, it's not. It's not a reason, but also she writes about the lives of women and girls in such a fascinating, complex, varied way, and and that's not a reason either of why she should be on the list. The reason she should be on the list is because she's a genius.
I mean, I haven't read anything by her, so like I can't comment, but.
And this novel, Hazards of Time Travel.
Wow.
But yeah, this novel is sort of labelled as a feminist dystopian fiction, another book that's sort of grouped in that area. And it is. It's about a woman in the very near future living in this very sort of totalitarian society where America has shifted to become a different sort of thing. All history before 9/11 has been erased from the history books. It's about a teenage girl in school and raised in this very blinkered society where you're just supposed to believe and know certain things, and you're not supposed to ask questions, but she asks questions, and her punishment is to be sent back in time to the late 50s and early 60s to this university where so this is where the sort of genre of the book becomes interesting. Sorry, I'm going to talk for ages, because it is feminist dystopian novel, but also sort of autobiographical, because it goes back to a time when Joyce Carol Oates was in university, and so it's a roughly parallel time, and a lot of her experiences, because I know a lot about Joyce Carol Oates' life, are sort of based on Joyce Carol Oates' own experience, and so it's almost like her, the author, like reflecting on her past and time and looking at how values have changed and where the country is going. And it's just there's so many fascinating things about psychology and behavioralism. There's a lot in it about B.F. Skinner, this behavioral psychologist, and his odd theories. And so it's like, but also looks at like sort of personal responsibility in politics, of how much we should sort of sacrifice and get involved in politics, and how much we should, just sort of live our lives the way we want to.
Okay. Well, all I'm going to say is... Oh, no, that one's not. All I'm going to say is that a Joyce Carol Oates coaster I can see?
It
all
is.
I'm going to say is
and if you look over there, you'll see those 3 shelves going upward are all Joyce Carol Oates
I'm in a house
books.
that has Joyce Carol Oates coasters, and I just feel like you need that context.
Which I have to say, I didn't make those myself. It's just because everybody knows I'm a fan.
I can't believe you have to justify that. I should hope not. Anyway, my next one is Painted to the King by Amy Sackville.
Ah, okay. Which I've read. It's not on my list.
So I denied about including this one, but I read this. I thought it was really interesting.
Oh, you did read? Okay.
Yeah, I didn't love it, but I
it is really
it
interesting.
absolutely fascinating, and it made me think a lot about art and writing and books and how we tell stories and history, and how it was one of those ones that I was more academically interested in and impressed by, rather than I sort of like fell for it emotionally.
I had the same
But
reaction.
I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and it's one I still think about. And it's about the life of Velasquez.
I'll say Velasquez.
Okay.
Diego Velasquez. But I don't know if that's the proper way to pronounce it.
Who was the painter to the king in the Spanish court.
1600s?
Yes.
I think.
And it's about him, but it's also got this sort of frame of the author looking at his paintings. He is the painter of, particularly famously, the oh my goodness, I can't remember what it's called.
Las Niñas?
Yes,
I think,
where it's like kind of almost like it's a painting of the royal family, but in a very non-traditional way. And it's like you're looking into it, and it's sort of a painting of the painting being done. It's clever because the way the book is told reflects that, because it's about someone looking at a painting of a painter painting a family. And so I just thought it was really, even though I didn't kind of necessarily love it emotionally, I was very impressed by it and very interested by it, and I have thought about it a lot. And
yeah, I agree.
So, yeah.
But yeah, there are aspects of the story that I think didn't come together. That I wish she had like lingered more on. Like there's a sort of mystic nun character that he goes to see, who's so fascinating. But yeah, she sort of gets left behind.
This book maybe would be one like for me, like with the Barbara Kingsolver. I'm not sure I would think that I would want it to win or even be shortlisted, but I feel like it's a really interesting book and it's doing something a bit different, and I would quite like it to see it represented, if not win a prize.
My next book, I think this almost, you could say like this is shoo-in, Normal People by Sally Rooney.
Oh, okay.
Or maybe not?
No, this is one I chose not to include because I don't like it.
Oh,
I agree that I agree it is a shoo-in. But I didn't, do you know what? It's one of those books that actually I didn't not like it, but I feel like I didn't like it in the face of the overwhelming deluge of love that compared to that.
There's been a lot of love for it. It's been hugely popular.
I loved Conversations with Friends. I love her writing. I didn't like this book. I didn't like the story. I loved reading her writing, and I love the way she describes people in these small moments, and she has an incredible turn of phrase. The story itself, I had some big problems with, and they were a bit spoilery, so I don't know how you feel. I mean, as everyone, I think, okay, so there's some things to do with abuse, and there's some things to do with how that affects you that I thought were troubling / simplistic.
Right.
And that whole thing really put like a real sour taste in my mouth for the whole reading experience.
Okay.
And fair. Also like I don't like how unresolved it is.
Yeah, and if it does get listed, I think we should talk about this a lot more, because it's really interesting. And actually, I don't think a lot of people have been.
More.
Yeah, I know.
It's quite an obvious thing, and not. Yeah. It's very present in the book, and for me, it was quite a troubling element. Yeah. And I'm surprised that it hasn't been talked about more. Right, my penultimate choice is Things Bright and Beautiful by Amber Salam, which is another book that I am not sure I think will be there, but I loved it, and I would really love to see it get. It's another one where I just think it deserves more attention.
Right, yeah. And it's a book I meant to read, and I just didn't get around to it. It's so good. She's it's a debut, and she's very young, and it's so assured. It's about a missionary couple who go to the South Pacific in the, I don't think it's ever explicitly stated, but it's like in the 50s-ish. And it's about basically when they're there, the woman is very uncomfortable, and the society, both the society she's come from, and as in that like American religious society, and the society she's in is sort of very patriarchal and hierarchical, and she basically can't really do anything, and she creates this tropical environment, so it's so like claustrophobic, and like you can just feel like how difficult it is for her to like get through the day, and just the fact they have such limited food, and it's so like visceral, and basically her husband he sort of gets sucked into the kind of religion there. So why it's clever is it's like The Secret History, in that at the end I won't say what it is, but at the end of the very first chapter, you are told
something very dramatic that is going to happen, and then you go back and you learn how it gets to that. And I really enjoy that as a concept, and I think it's really hard to pull off because you've told people what's going to happen, but I think that she still like creates this incredible sense of dread and tension, and you know what's going to happen, but you don't know exactly how it's happened. It has similarities with The Water Cure, I think. It's about like feminism and faith and family and kind of these complicated, intense, interpersonal, like family relationships, and how kind of faith and ideologies can bring people together and also though drive a wedding. It's got this it's another one with a really great ending.
So my last choice is one you've already mentioned, is Woman Talking by Miriam Towers. I never know how to say her name. Is it Towers or Toes?
I always say Towers, but I don't know if that's right. This is another one that I should have realised it was eligible, and it just bypassed me that it was.
Yeah, I think it came out in August or September.
It was one of your favourite books last year, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
We've talked about it. I don't know why I missed it.
It's another book that deals with faith so complexly. And I made a video recently reading 1-star reviews of my favourite books from last year, and so one of this was one of them. And the main complaint of that reviewer was that all these women are talking about is faith and religion, and like so it's about a group of women who are raised and live in a Mennonite community in Bolivia, and this completely sequestered life. They don't have any contact with the outside world, raised in this very strict religion. What else are they going to talk about but faith? So it's sort of like, read that reviewer for filth, because it's like ridiculous complaint to have about a book, because it's obviously it deals with faith a lot, but also other issues that have to do with the human condition, and so even though I'm not somebody who came from a particularly religious background, I still related to it a lot and cared about it a lot, and and especially because it's another sort of like trigger warning thing. It deals with very much based on this real subject have happened of this community of women in Bolivia, where it found out over a number of years women in this community sustained rape and abuse while they were unconscious. They were given animal tranquilizers and raped by men from their own community continuously over a long period of time, women of all ages from young to quite old. And then to even make it more horrific, we're told it was sort of their fault that when they woke up with bruised and damaged, that it was the devil punishing them. And it's such an awful subject. But it's the basis of the story is this group of women coming together after it's been revealed, and certain men in the community are still trying to cover up what happened or make excuses for what happened, and these women getting together themselves, trying to deal with what they should do from now on, because they grew up in this community. It's all they've ever known. Do they go out into the wider world, or do they stay there and try to fight back against the men, or just go back to life as it was before? And about that horrible dilemma that they're in. And it's so interesting structurally how it's told too, because they've been raised in this faith. They, like most of them, don't know how to write at all. So the recording of their conversations is done by a man in the community who has a difficult relationship with the community himself, because he sort of left it and then came back, and so it's sort of it's about the necessity of how it needs to be told from through a man's perspective. But these women trying to make their own voices heard, when in this community they've been traditionally suppressed. So a massive subject, and so amazingly done. And and for saying all that, like, I feel this has said so much about literary novels that deal with like difficult subjects. There is a lot of humor in it too, and the way they converse. So it's I think it's so well done. Such a powerful novel. Really,
I think it's one where I am gonna off camera probably ask you about how it ends, because I think it's one of those ones that like I just am too nervous to read it, I think. And I think I think it's one of those ones where I'm gonna need to sacrifice spoilers to feel not very stressed reading it.
Right, yeah.
My last choice is Pumpty by Charlene
Oh,
Thiel.
great, yes. Which
You looked really confused at that, and I was like...
So no, it's just the way you said it. It sounded like punt, like.
Oh,
punt.
no, sorry.
Is that? But I mean that's.
Ponty, isn't that?
Is that how it?
I think I was.
I say Ponty, but that's because I'm American, so I like to stress the O. Where I say Ponty rather than Punty.
You don't say that's a ridiculous exaggeration of my accent.
Sorry.
Anyway, have you not picked this one?
I have not, no. Which is bad because
have you read it?
I did, yeah, and I I loved it. So I know it's bad, but I couldn't pick everything. There's too much to put on the list.
You read more than me, so. You read it and enjoyed it. It's a brilliant story about 3 women, and I just thought it was really well. It's so beautifully written, isn't it? And it feels very different to things I've read before. And,
it is.
It's about sort of 2 girls growing up, 2 best friends, and their mother. And the mother was the star of these kind of like B-movie horror movies about Ponty, called Ponty, Pontiac, which is like a woman who like feeds on men, and that's a real myth, isn't it?
This figure from mythology.
I just found it very engaging and really complex female. It's not complex female characters, but like it's not about a strong female characters, but they're really complex. And it's really, I like reading about female characters that have the space to be. It's not as simple as like unlikable. They're just real people, and it grapples with a lot of issues to do with like growing up and bodies, and I thought it was very well done. I feel like I'm being less effusive just because I read it ages ago.
And I read it last summer, just before going to see you interview the author at the Lush event.
She was so great, wasn't she? It was one of my faves.
And I think it's really cleverly structured how she does it. It sort of goes back and forth between these different time periods and these different women, and but sort of gradually reveals emotions and aspects to their relationships over time, to the point where I was pretty much in tears at one point because the way the mother-daughter relationship is portrayed, I thought is particularly effective and just sort of like broke my heart, and that was so good. So. Because
it doesn't have like that. It doesn't have a traditional sort of forward-moving plot structure. It just kind of builds up these layers of these relationships and these women in a very effective way.
And there's a lot of hidden meaning too, because actually, when I mentioned before that Natalie Hayes interviewed Madeline Miller, she also interviewed her alongside Charlene Thiel, because there's a whole like mythological connection to her, because one of the characters is named Circe, and
of course,
so you could see parallels between that and
talking about the way we build on layers, of course. Like, it'd be really interesting to go back and read, because I felt like when I read Ponty, I didn't really know anything about Circe, like the myth, and like actually it'd be really interesting, and I'd maybe pick up on more there. Yeah. That I'd missed. Books, hey?
I know.
They're amazing.
So clever.
Right, that's my list.
Yeah, and that's all of my list because the parallel ones that we had.
So we had 6 matches.
Yeah, which is quite good for.
Also, 7 because I meant to write the Atessa down, and I've taken Putney out.
So 7 matches. So we've been talking for a very long time, and we should wrap this up. So thank you very much if you've watched all of this. But just like, because part of the reason why I love making this video so much is like I get so excited talking about the Women's Prize, but also it's a wonderful chance to catch up with what Anna and I've been reading, because when, as you can tell, when we start talking about books, we can talk for ages and ages and ages. And there's just so many interesting things to say about them. Yeah. So it'll be exciting in a week's time. In March 4th. Yes. The official long list will be posted, and then the shortlist will be announced on April 29th, and then the winner will be announced on June 5th. It's the start of the season.
I think we've got more matches than usual, and also lots of we were thinking about, and it's interesting, I feel like we are pulling from a shallower pool than we have in the past.
Which is interesting, because there are so many books that we were thinking about, like a much wider list than this.
We've honed in on, I think if we had picked 20 each, we would have had a lot in common. So it'd be interesting to see if we're in sort of in the same vein as the judges, or we are just.
I mean, it's impossible to tell because, like with every prize. True, could could be that. But yeah, you have no idea how the judges are going to go. So I'm sure there'll be a bunch of surprises on the list. Yeah, and I'm sort of hoping there because that's always part of the fun thing.
New books for sure.
So yeah, so let us know in the comments below, are any of these your top choices as well? What do you think of them? Do you really disagree with us? Do you, or are there other books that you're really hoping to see on the list? Let us know in the comments below. For ease of access, I'll list all the books that we've been talking about in the description below if you click show more, and links to all of them, so you can find out if we've perked your interest in any of them and want to read them now. And yeah, you can go find out more about them and read them and let us know what you think of them.
We might not do a shortlist prediction because realistically I am unlikely, unless there's a high proportion of books I've already read. I don't tend to prioritise reading the whole long list because I've just got too many.
That'd be a big demand, yeah.
But we normally try and definitely do a winner's prediction. We'll definitely read the shortlist.
Yeah, so thank you for watching, and I'll put a link down below to Anna's channels as well, of course. And,
I haven't made a video for a long time, but follow me on Instagram.
Yeah, I'll put a link to your Instagram too, and by Pages & Co. Tilly and the Book Wanderers. By author Anna. I bought it for my friend's daughter for Christmas, Harriet for Christmas, along with this beautiful edition of Anne of Green Gables, because they sort of complement each other. So we'll speak to you again soon, and hopefully make a new video talking about our winner prediction. Talk to you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.